possible? Yes, how is it possible to turn a story of violence, exploitation, ambition, greed, and betrayal into a story of hope, humility, deep emotional connection with Mother Nature, and self-discovery? Well, for you it's simple. You just need to listen to me, Davide, the impertinent collector, who in this video will take you down a soul-searching journey that is very much about you as much as it is about me. But before we start, let's take a moment to somehow acknowledge a bit of a tendency that is taking hold and is some sort of a counterculture that states that, a formal education is not really needed these days, and that studying Latin or ancient Greek is very much a waste of time, and for the matter, the whole humanities are not something where you will put too much effort earlier on in your formation as a kid and later on as an adult, because there is no way that you're gonna make a successful money-making career within the humanities. And so, there is a little bit of that. But there is also part of the same culture, some statement that claims that, Venice and Paris are very much overrated. Right. Like, you have been sitting down in some market square at the Café Florian, drinking coffee with a glass of mineral water, looking at La Basilica di San Marco, San Mark Basilica, with the orchestra behind you that display jazz and live music, right? Like, these people have never been to Fauchon in Place de la Madeleine in Paris, something like the mother of all delicatessen, if we can call it like that, the equivalent of Fortune and Mason in Piccadilly in London. Or, if we want to add drink during winter, chocolat à l'ancienne at the marble round table of Les Domagos in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Who are these people that claim that classical music is overrated and so is opera? Have you ever watched a video of Pavarotti, Domingo and Carreras singing live at the Terme di Caracalla in Rome, Vincerò? Have they? That's what I'm asking you. And to me, this is important. And yes, if you have a moment for a crossover between what is traditional and what is modern, look for a YouTube video of a concert of Pavarotti and friends when in Modena he sang This Is Our Men's World in a duet with James Brown. Have a look and tell me if he's overrated or not. And so, In this dialogue that I have with you, sharing my stories and sharing my trips around the world, I can say this to you in terms of what is overrated and not. I must have been 9, 10 years old when I saw the Mona Lisa, or what we Italians called La Gioconda, painted by Leonardo da Vinci at the Louvre. And at the time, there was just a little code, you could have come very close and even touch it. And there were not that many people. You know, if I try to go in that room there now, not only there are so many people that you can't even see from the distance, but you are quite separated, there is a thick glass. And mind you, thanks to that thick glass and the protection that has been put in place, otherwise those idiots that throw a red soup a few days ago might have ruined it. But the idea is that people turned back to the Mona Lisa in order to take a selfie of themselves with that painting of Leonardo. When I saw it, it was an extraordinary experience. And I remember a few years later, I saw the Sistine Chapel in Rome by Michelangelo for the second time. But this time I remember was different because it was after a major renovation that took place for a couple of years, where nobody could actually see it or couldn't see all of it. There was all scaffolding. And so they had completely restored it, completely cleaned up, reclaiming the original colors of Michelangelo and put a modern lighting in place. And I remember walking in this massive room where in the days they used to have the conclave, where the Pope would get nominated. And you just look up with your mouth wide open. And they were letting us in small group like they do now as well. And we would slowly moving towards the other end of this big room. And so you get closer to the final judgment. This like wonderful, incredible pile of naked bodies of all ages and all sexes contorted, that the Pope himself was so shocked when he saw it that as soon as Michelangelo died, he commissioned a minor painter to put all clouds and sort of like a old piece of fabric around the naked body or the naked part of the body to somehow conceal the shame of the naked body. And so I remember that as we move forward, the groups that were let in, the small groups that were let in behind us, you could hear, oh, and as you move closer and closer, this oh for the new groups of people was hitting you from further and further away. I also remember that it was like winter, probably late afternoon, when I visited for the first time the Pantheon in Rome. And so it was dark and cold outside, and you walking in this space through these massive doors, I don't know how many meters tall, 6, 7, 8 meters, that are the only two set of doors that survive from the time of ancient Rome. And so you walk through, and it's a magical place, and of course you see the oculum, you are in the presence of something spectacular. And then again, when I find myself in the plateau of Giza in Egypt, when the Sphinx and the pyramids were, after a little walk around with the tour guide, we have been given 3 hours, 3.5 hours to wander around by ourselves. And so I did, and I reached the Great Pyramid, and I walked around the Great Pyramid. And I remember back then, you already have Graham Hancock, all sort of conspiracy theories, alien technology, or some sort of like civilization that was way more advanced than ours, that had mastered the technique of balancing gravity so they could move these massive blocks. And I remember when I was there, because I read some of his books, together with all the proper archaeologists, saying, my God, if people have been here to see the volume of this monument, you know, it would be very easy to buy that side of the story opposed to the one of the archaeologists. So there was awe and there was shock. But in all these fabulous experiences that I had, I wasn't moved. And this is important. Because now I place you in a time, early 2000, when I was living in London, when I lived for over 10 years, and I was climbing the corporate ladder. I had finally achieved to get in one of the most prestigious buildings in the city, on the border with the Thames, and from my desk I have massive windows. I could see the Tate Modern, I could see the Millennium Bridge, the pedestrian bridge, as has been like constructed. I was among the first one that when they opened it in the afternoon was able to walk the bridge, and they immediately had a problem because the bridge was wobbling, and they had to close it for a few months until the famous architect who put the bridge together, designed the bridge, Norman Foster, one of the most famous contemporary architect of our time. His reputation was on the line because they didn't know how to fix this problem that was not anticipated. The more people were walking on this bridge, the more the bridge would wobble. So they had to close the bridge. I also remember all this from my office, when slowly on 4 massive barges, they have to take on the times the section of the London Eye that was then put up again with some big problems next to the House of Parliament on the other side, of course. So I got to see all of these things from my office, including, I remember when they retired the Concorde, they flew free Concorde very low on London, following the Thames. And in our office on the Thames, everybody was there looking at it, but we were inside from our office and we could see it. And yet, in that hustling and bustling, trying to climb, trying to secure my bonus, trying to show to my manager that I was loyal to him, whilst trying to prove to his manager that I was as good as him in case a replacement was to happen. In all of this, and I love London, I absolutely love London. It was like a lot of activity, a lot of people. And so at least once a year, on a regular basis, it was also the time, the early days of the low first airline. I could fly to Madrid, I could fly to Berlin, I could fly to Paris. In fact, we could even take the Eurostar that opened a couple of years early, and then in few hours we were actually in the center of Paris without any check-in with the flight and so on, leaving from Waterloo. So we had all of that, but at least once a year I would take a long holiday, a couple of weeks holiday by myself to recharge. And that was also the time where, like, you still didn't have the smartphone, we didn't have the iPhone, so you didn't have the app and the email on your phone, and you were not required to bring your work laptop. And then my laptop was a secure laptop for part of what I was doing, so I wouldn't have been able to sort of browse the internet overseas with that particular laptop because there was a certain layer of security. So I just had my own laptop, but the moment that I step out of the office and I went to the airport, I knew that I was totally off the hook for a couple of weeks, including the fact that you didn't have international roaming, nobody could reach you on your mobile. It was sort of liberating. So I would take a nice resort, you know, it could have been Thailand, it could have been Malaysia, it could have been some other more exotic places where I would book myself into a nice hotel with a nice swimming pool, and I would actually recharge. But at some point, I became a little bit more adventurous. And after the trip to Egypt, I decided to embark in a trip overseas that was supposed to be also physically challenging. That was the Inca Trail in Peru. So I tried to sort of prepare myself. I've always been a bit of a slug, from chair to sofa, that's my life, and then I like to walk around, but I'm not the active guy that will go to the gym and so on. Hence the little bit of belly that you can see in some of my videos. I'm working on it, but you know, I'm hoping that sooner or later some sort of plastic surgery, you know, will siphon all the fat out and I will come out fully sculptured. But until then, you know, I'm still a bit of a lazy bum in that sense. So back then, at the time, I thought that that would be a bit of a challenge, that would sort of like encourage me to walk more in order to get ready. And so when I went, the Inca Trail itself was like 5 days. You will start from Cusco and then you would reach Machu Picchu. And there was like a challenging path because Cusco was already 3,400 meters above sea level, whilst Machu Picchu was 2,400, so like 1,000 meter difference in terms of altitude. But in the middle, you have this mountain that you have to walk that was 4,200 meters high. And so, you know, it was challenging, but it was like extraordinarily organized. It was a small group. We ended up being like 8 or 9 people, all flying from London. And through the journey, as we walked, to give an idea, for these 8 or 9 people, there were like 12 servants, 12 porters. So we had a couple of donkeys, we had a horse, they were carrying all our backpack, they were carrying oxygen, they had like a connection with an helicopter in case of need. And I remember when, after a couple of days in Lima, that is on the sea level, I landed in Cusco. we were taken to a hotel particulier, a nice little colonial house that has been converted in rooms, but we were asked back then to lie in bed for at least 6 hours, because we were actually going through the compression of the plane from sea level to 3,003 meters, all in one bang. So they say, like, even if you feel good, get to your room and lying down, don't do absolutely anything. And so, like, I thought, oh, I've done that, I felt good, I already booked myself in the most famous restaurant of Cusco, and we had a couple of days to sort of wander around Cusco by ourselves. And at that time, I haven't actually met my companions that would accompany me on the Inca Trail. I was traveling sort of by myself, everybody was by himself, and the Inca Trail itself was like a segment of the bigger holiday, and everything has to be organized with permits and so on. So it's only when we reached the meeting point at 8 o'clock at the main church square that they took us on a little minivan and they took us to the start of the Inca Trail, that I met my other 8 companions, all from the UK, with 3 people, a couple and a friend of theirs coming from Scotland. And so we all started this walk. And from everything that I could gather before the trip itself, the trip wasn't supposed to be that taxing on sort of on the body. You still have to go up from 3,300 meters of Cusco to 4,200 meters, and then you will start to come down and you have a change of vegetation as it will become like more tropical as you descend down towards Machu Picchu. But what I didn't account for, and I think nobody accounted for, was what people that know me would call it a miracle. Yes, the miracle was that it was actually impossible, and everybody were like middle 30s, early 30s, somebody were like late 40s. Nobody could actually walk and talk, because you already started from an altitude when you had 30% less oxygen. And so the moment you start doing strenuous activities, continuous, even if it's low intensity, you couldn't master enough oxygen to walk and talk. And we were walking for 8 hours a day, slowly but surely, and we were climbing. And so that was like a surprise to me. I couldn't actually talk to the other people, and we find ourselves spaced out, and we had the donkeys in the back, we had the horse in front with the oxygen, all our bags. We were not carrying absolutely anything. We were just walking one step in front of the other. And the walk was organized so that roughly every 45 minutes or 50 minutes, you would actually stop for 5 minutes. The rule was like, stop, don't sit down. When we reach 1 hour and a half of walk, we would stop for 15 minutes and you could sit, but you absolutely shouldn't have taken your boots out because your feet would immediately swollen. You wouldn't be able to put the foot back in the boot. So, you take the 15 minutes, and every 3 or 4 hours, we would come to the most extraordinary area that was part of the truck, where they had all blankets lined out, and there were like 7 or 8 chairs, and you would actually sit on this chair, opposed to sitting on the rock or sitting on the grass when you're taking the break. You can actually sit on the chair, and one of these porters would remove our shoes, remove our sock, and there was a bowl with warm water and soap, and you would put your feet inside this bowl of warm water, and then they would serve you a feast, because you burn a lot of energy doing that, but they would actually buy all the products locally, and somebody, a cook, would actually cook the whole meal for you in this area. So this experience, when you ended up walking for 4 hours in silence, then taking a break, and then you would arrive to the night camp. I remember after we had the lunch break, there was like 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. Then you would start getting ready, and then we would start walking first with the guides with us, and people were like behind, packing everything, closing everything, cleaning everything, and then overtaking us to another path, so that when it was around 6 p.m., you would arrive to another highly scenic space, when each one of us had a tent ready, set up, individual tents, when you could go in and rest. And so I remember in the first night, I made a monumental mistake. I was, at some point, when I was like nearly 40 minutes away from this camp, the camp was a little bit lower. I could see this yellow tent, and I felt a super energy coming. Somehow I felt that I mastered the breathing. I knew that, the pause was like imminent, and so I accelerated. I left everybody behind, and trotty, I got to the camp before anybody else. There they served me like a freshly squeezed juice with oranges, mandarins, and whatever was, like some local herbs. Then, took out the booth, they wash my feet, and they say like, take a little nap, and then dinner is served in 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. I went into the tent, and boom, I fell completely asleep, completely deep. They couldn't wake me up when they called me. So I was there, and then at some point at 2 a.m. I wake up, low in calories, with a massive headache, the mother of all headaches, and I had to go to the toilet. So, I have to look. They had luckily I knew what to look for. They set up this little squarish tent that is closed on 3 parts, and I left to go there, but it was totally dark. There was no moon. I had the most incredible sky, and I wasn't wearing the boots, so I just put the socks, and the socks were like completely wet and frozen cold because of the temperature. So I have to walk myself, and thanks God I didn't fall inside the latrine, taking down the old turns and everything. But basically, I was also starving with this massive headache, low on sugar. I have to wait until 7 a.m., 8 a.m. when they serve breakfast. Then I starve myself because so those are sort of the mistakes that you make. But in the course of these 5 days, when you couldn't really socialize with the other member of the parties, you were sleeping alone, you were deep in your own thought. And coming from London and even Heathrow Airport, one of the busiest airports in the world, you know, you're like a cattle in this Brazilian cattle house when they have like 350,000 poor cattle treated that way, you know, for the beef industry. And so used to London, millions of people, the commuting, I have to commute in, taking the train in town, even if I was in the center, but I have to go to the city, so full food. So to be in a position where like you were not talking to anybody, you were walking, and you were surrounded by the most incredible scenery, in total silence, and you really have to synchronize your pace with your breathing, especially as we went up. You know, it was something that got you thinking. And like, whilst in the first night, I slept like a log, apart from when I woke up and it was terrible. The following night, we all started having very vivid dreams. Mind you, they offer us cocoa leaves to chew, the proper cocoa leaves of the plant, as a fatigue booster, you know, energy booster to manage your fatigues. So you would walk with this leaf, coca leaf in your mouth that you would chew, and nobody was talking. So you walk, but you master this walking, breathing, then you have the coca, and you have this nature, you have this most incredible sun. You know, you are up relatively early, because we were up like around 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock, just to give us 2 hours and a half to see if everybody was okay. They could give you a massage or something. They could give you some oxygen if you needed to. But you know, we sort of had this walk, and like, unknown to me, on the first night, the 3 people from Scotland, they had brought 2 bottles of single malt whiskey, Scotch whiskey, the very finest. And they had the good idea, the 3 of them, separated from everybody else, to drink the whiskey there. And they also had a splitting headache, because the alcohol at a high altitude, if you're not used, is really smash your head. And so, like, it was a terrible experience for them. When they had just a little sip of this whiskey, their head exploded. So we went into this walk, and we could see all these farmers that were there, individual farmers on all these terraces, with these big bags weaved with local material, full of potato. Must have like 50 kilos, 100 kilos, 150 kilos, moving slowly, all this traditional lady. At some point we reached a school, literally in the middle of nowhere, and we were asked inside, and everybody felt embarrassed, because they asked if we had any pens or if he had any notepad, and we have not been told. So, you know, we had a little bit of something because it still was a time when you would have a pen of something, but not as much as we would have liked if we have known in advance. So everybody felt a little bit of embarrassment. And when they ask, it's like, oh, can we give some money? He says like, oh, no, we don't take money. So afterwards, I asked the guide, Alejandro, says like, why they didn't take money? And I had like US dollars with me. And he says like, oh, look, they know that you got these tourists coming, they give them the money, and some gangs that control some other trades there, they could go there and take the money away. So if you give pen or some material, some stuff, you know, is far more valuable for the school, you know, even books. They wouldn't take that, but they would take the money if you were given money. So they knew. And so you come across this reality on this school with like probably 15 kids from like 4 or 5 years old until 12, 13, 14, because when you get older, you start working with your family, and like if you are too young, the mother carries you, you know, to the fields, to whatever you are picking up. So you get exposed to that reality in a context that is totally not politicized and not ideological. And then you have this nature. And then like in our case, like we were coming from the UK, we're coming from London. Like in my case, I was coming from this idea that I would climb the corporate until I get to the board of directors. And so, you know, I had in my desk the view, the whole routine, the whole community that I absolutely loved it when I was in London. And I felt like an old piece of Chinese pottery that after hundreds of years is starting to show some cracks. And you feel the cracks. And they're tiny, you don't see them yet, but you feel that this wonderful piece of pottery is losing its structural binding. And so we go there and we arrive eventually to what was like a proper official camp. That was the last camp of these 5 days. So we have the last dinner, and in this camp all the other people that were doing the Inca Trail, because there are different paths, you know, were there. But to give an idea, there might have been like 50 people, 60 people. So to us it looked like, oh wow, there is people, there is life. And also it was, you finally were like, the moment when we start dropping below the 3,000 meters, every 50 meters, you could breathe in more oxygen. And you felt a power that was like extraordinary. And that extra oxygen was going through your brain. I wasn't chewing the coca leaf anymore because it was all down, but I still felt the effect. Then I have this oxygen. It was like somebody was injecting me with some special energy. And so you feel that, and you go to this last camp, and it is the night. And then in the morning, around 6 o'clock, they take the group for the last 2 hours walk at night in the dark, and they take you to the entrance of Machu Picchu from the top. And is timed so that the sun rises, and it goes from cold to hot and the temperature there is tropical, opposed to the other part of Cusco. When you climb up, it was a little bit colder. At some point when you climb down, even if you were at 3,000 meters, you could tell tropical weather. And even if you were coming down and you could see all the valley, you had an idea that you had some sort of an helicopter view, but you didn't. Machu Picchu was totally hidden away. And that is the reason why they never found it, the conquistadores. It was only found back in 1911, after it has been abandoned for hundreds of years. But when you arrive there, it's still quite dark, you can't make up anything, and from a mountain on the back, the sunrise, it hits your eyes first, but then you can see the shadow of all the construction in this plateau, and it is a mystical experience. A mystical experience that is compounded by everything that you carry with you during the walk. And whilst for me, the traditional holidays that we take in a resort were like detoxing, this one was different. This one was enriching me. I don't know, maybe it was the coca leaves, but you felt like this land was giving you something back, more than you can possibly take. And as we were there, again, I didn't, but like some of us, I did have like a small traditional camera with the films, so I took the pictures, like people had like big cameras with big lenses, but we were all stood there. We all looked around, and then we started to walk down to Machu Picchu itself. And you also had a glimpse. There was nobody there, it was completely deserted. We, the people who do the Inca Trail, are the first people who have access. But the Machu Picchu were open around 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. You could see a winding road, that is the road that we took on the way back, coming from Agua Caliente, that is the touristic village that is at the very bottom of Machu Picchu, filled with big buses, one after the other, and they were slowly going up and up to reach Machu Picchu. You could see them already queuing up, long queue of these buses that were like, I'm telling you, on the way back we had our own bus. It was like a sort of like terrifying experience, because when you went down, you had the one that was still coming up and us going down, and so the road was like winding and like incredible. But in all this experience, there was everything that each one of us brought back with him in that moment. And in this extraordinary vision of Machu Picchu, you realize that it was like an extraordinary place, a place that had been abandoned because the conquistadores, they brought smallpox, but also because they were brutal, and so like they had to abandon it and disperse, and so you are aware of the history of sort of exploitation and everything that happens, and you are coming from a Western culture where like people like Cristoforo Columbus is celebrated like a historical figures to be proud of, and instead the reality shows that he was a very violent man, very nasty man, not less violent and not less nasty than Cortez and Pizarro, that Pizarro that went down to, South America, and the case of Pizarro is the one who went into Peru and was allowed to pillage Peru and send all the gold back. So you are familiar with all of that. But something has also happened the night before. When we were having dinner, the tour guide told us that, and we sort of knew, this travel agency was specialized in exotic ethical trips, where at least 80% of what you were spending was staying within the community. And like, it was not cheap, and the hotels, when we stay in the accommodation, were not fantastic. But of course, imagine during these 5 days, we have the tent, we have the chef, we had everything. So in that sense, it wasn't luxurious, but it was very high-end. It was like the best holidays you can possibly do. But that night, the fifth night, when we were having the last dinner together, the tour guide told us that the people who had accompanied us, they were all there with us, they all come from poor families, they all have relatives, they all have young children. And so they ask, again, very much like in the case of a school, not for a money donation, but they said, like, if you are going back to Lima, like in my case, we were taking the super train with a glass roof, back to Cusco, and then another couple of nights in Cusco, then back to Lima, where I spent another 3-4 days. But he said, like, if you can spare anything, please leave it outside. So he shows an area, and don't be afraid. Anything you can think of, you don't need it, give it to us. And we are talking about socks, underwear, t-shirt, jumper, shoes, anything, give it to us. And I have to say, we were also taken, because again, he told us that there is some sort of a local mafia that if they know you are very privileged to be able to work closely with these rich tourists, and so they get harassed at the end of every tour to see if they receive cash, they receive US dollars. So like, if you give all these things, and all our party was very generous, I went back to my tent and I gave everything. In fact, I even gave my rucksack, and I ended up with a couple of plastic bags. To give an idea, I brought 4 sets of shoes, because I had 2 walking shoes of slightly different size, one that I used in London for 3 or 4 weeks prior, sort of to break, and then some newer one, slightly bigger. Then I had like an underline, just socks. But in the other shoes, then I had a pair of sneakers and another pair of shoes. So I gave away all the 3 pair of shoes. I only kept 1 pair of shoes. I gave t-shirts, underwear. I gave all the underwear. I gave all the socks. I gave everything to them. The bag, I had a little thermos. I gave the thermos and everything. And the emotional things that happened the following morning is when we all went for breakfast. He told us, the tour guide, what had happened. And what had happened is that him and his assistant would have lined up all the items that each one of us had donated and created 12 piles of identical value. And then they do a straw pick when in front of us, the 12 guys that accompany us, most of them, we never see them because they were ahead or behind, and you wouldn't talk, you wouldn't be able to connect. They would pick and they could choose the pile. And so in this pile I could see a couple of my jumpers. I bought a technical jacket against the wind and another jacket, one light against the wind and one a little bit buffed up. So like I saw into different piles. I saw my two basically new pair of shoes. One was brand new and the other one like I used it for 2 or 3 weeks in London, then I used it for the Inca Trail. So there was also brand new in 2 separate piles. And in one pile alone, you have this bottle of Scotch whiskey, because the Scottish that have brought the whiskey with them, they were not able to go to the second bottle. And this bottle of whiskey, that probably would have cost already a couple of $100, certainly a couple of $100 if you were buy like in London, like they bought it in Oban or wherever they were coming from in the Scottish Isles. But like it was a very high quality whiskey. They couldn't touch it after they tried it the first night. And that in itself was the gold price. But it was fascinating that when the first person got to choose, he had to look at each pile and like, yes, he would have liked to go for the bottle of whiskey. And they also had 4 glass goblets, but those 4 glass goblets, 2 and 2 were in 2 separate piles. And so the guy that won the contest of choosing first didn't pick up the bottle of whiskey because he took some other stuff. And so when we were there, on the peak looking at Machu Picchu, and then when at the end I went down to the square, they load us into the bus, and you got all of a sudden you had the noise of people, you had the noise of this heavy diesel engine, boom, 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 with the smoke. Then you went down to this little village, Acqua Caliente, that is being totally commercialized. Luckily it was commercialized because I was able to buy some underwear and some socks, right? So, but it's like, it wasn't really sad, but when I went back to my hotel room, I didn't feel like going out and mixing with all the people. And like all the people, some were arriving with the same train, so there were different trains. The one we took is on the way back is the luxury train with the glass ceiling, but there were other trains and other buses that were coming from other areas. So you had all sorts of tourists, from the super rich to the backpackers. So you had this mix, and there was alcohol, there was noise, there was pollution. I didn't feel like going out because my head was very much on that peak point, looking down at Machu Picchu. And in that moment, I took the decision that my time in London was over. My time in the corporate world was no longer of any interest of me. When I saw the money side and I saw the utility of what money can buy, with these 12 piles, with like, including dirty underwear and socks, it was really ridiculous because nobody wanted to, some of us say like, oh, those are my shoes, oh yes, that's my jacket, but like somebody didn't want to say like, oh, in that little plastic bag there is dirty underwear that I've been using for the last 6 days. So it was sort of quite funny in that sense, but you get a sense and the pride of these beautiful people, and these people who chew the coca and live constantly at very high temperature. They have sort of bulging eye, and the skin is really like leather, dark, and the hair is like, they're like magnificent people. You can see of all the ages. If they're old, you got all these deep cracks in the skin, but it's like it's wonderful. And so that was my experience. When I went back to Cusco, I went to a shop and I bought this alpaca jumper that you see me wearing today. And you can see it's starting to lose it. It's over 20 years old. This is my precious item that I took from Peru, from Cusco, because I thought maybe one day I'll be able to go back and give this one back as a gift in this pile system. And so I leave you with my alpaca jumper and a popular traditional Peruvian proverb that might go back to the Incas, that says, the sun shines the same for everybody. And so what it means is, yes, the sun is always shining for everybody, and it really doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter how young or how old you are, it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. The sun is the same for everybody. And this is Davide, the impertinent collector. And if you want to know a little bit more about my vision, you can also follow me on Instagram, the impertinent collector. I might put a link in the description. A kiss with the memory of Machu Picchu.